I would like today to talk to you about terminology of just simple types of jewelry that's made by Native American Indian jewelry. So some of these are very simple, some maybe you haven't heard of. So you have things like concho belts. So what's a concho belt? It is made generally with somewhere between 6 and 12 different round ovals. Very typically was made as early as the 1870s. It can range in value from a huge amount if it's early, like a first phase concho belt, which could be $25,000 for an example that's just extraordinary, to a nice concho belt you could buy for $400 or $500. So concho belts are a type of belt being worn. You have cluster bracelets usually you will see in Navajo or Zuni. There are a multitude of stones that are laid into a bracelet. And these are generally, if you have a Zuni piece, it's finer bezel work, and the cluster work has a certain look to it that's different than Navajo cluster work. Both are wonderful, and both have been made for a very long time. You have robe bracelets. Robe bracelets are simple design elements of stones in a bracelet, and it can be anywhere from 3 to 12 stones or even more. Robe bracelets are often seen early on in the 20s and 30s, and these are some of the most collectible type bracelets. You also have box and bows, which is a type of squash blossom, and it has a square part to the blossom, and it looks kind of like a bow. They call it box and bow squash blossoms. These are generally was started around the 30s, and they still make them today. But generally, the early ones, which we think of, are somewhere between the 30s and 40s time frame. You have joclas, which are the hanging component to a necklace. They're made out of beads. They could also be worn as earrings. And often we would just say it's a jocla necklace, and so it's a necklace, but it has the drops on the piece. You also have, again, squash blossoms, as we discussed, which has a naja. This is a term that comes from the Spanish word, and it looks like a horseshoe. And then you have the squashes that would go around the necklace. These are very common. They were really made, a lot of these were made in the 60s and 70s. But again, some of these squashes can be as early as the 1890s. So there's a whole variety of value associated with squash blossoms as well. You also have bolos. Bolo ties really started in about the 50s time frame when you really start thinking about bolos. 50s, 60s, 70s, still made today. Some of the best contemporary jewelry today is really a bolo tie. And these were made in the Southwest, so you wouldn't have to wear a tie. So my father wore a bolo every day to work at the university, and he never wore a tie. He loved bolos. They're very interesting. Finally, we have what's called depressionera necklaces. And depressionera necklaces are generally were made at Santo Domingo and Zuni. They have a Thunderbird design for the most part. They often would use batteries, old batteries or records. And they're called depressionera because during World War II, when you had a time frame when you really couldn't use metals, they would use whatever they could do. And often it was plastics. So these actually have developed into be very collectible, and they're called depressionera necklaces. So those are some of the terminology of the types of jewelry you can expect to find in Native American Indian jewelry.